Welcome to my channel. Subscribe and enjoy daily stories about cheating, revenge, and relationship advice. It was an unremarkable Saturday morning, the kind where the air felt thick with routine. I was at the kitchen table, sipping coffee that had long since gone cold, flipping through a newspaper I wasn't really reading. The light outside was dull, overcast, matching the mood that had settled between Jane and me for weeks now, maybe even months. She was standing by the window, the back of her head to me, staring out at the street with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. Her posture seemed casual enough, but there was something off, something too tense, too deliberate about the way she stood there, like she was waiting for the right moment to speak. Then, without turning around, she said it. "I'm going out with someone tonight." Her voice was quiet, almost tentative, as if testing how it would sound out loud. But even in its softness, there was something sharp about it, something that cut straight through the stillness of the room. I set the newspaper down, the pages rustling loudly in the silence that followed her words. I blinked once, then again, the meaning of her statement slowly sinking in, though I already knew where this was going. Still, I had to ask. "Someone?" I said, my voice flat. "Like a friend, or?" She turned around then, finally facing me. Her eyes were steely, but her lips quivered slightly. It was as if she was daring me to push her further. "A man," she clarified, her tone firmer now. "His name is Jack Robinson." My heart pounded in my chest, the name ringing a bell almost immediately. Jack Robinson. He was the guy she had been mentioning offhandedly for the past few months, first as a colleague on some new project, then as someone she'd grab coffee with after meetings. I had noticed how often he came up, but I had convinced myself it was harmless, that I was just being paranoid. Now, here it was, spelled out in front of me. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms as I stared at her. "Jack Robinson," I repeated slowly, as if saying his name might somehow make this feel more real. "So you're telling me, you're going on a date with this guy?" Her eyes flashed, and she took a step forward, defensive. "It's just dinner," she said. "It's not a big deal." I raised an eyebrow, incredulous. "Not a big deal?" I repeated, my voice rising despite my effort to stay calm. "Jane, you're married. You're married to me. And you think going out with another man for dinner isn't a big deal?" She folded her arms across her chest, mirroring my posture, but her movements were more abrupt, more frustrated. "I didn't say it like that," she shot back. "It's just one dinner. We've been distant for months, and you know it." So that's your excuse." I cut her off, feeling the anger rise like a wave I couldn't hold back anymore. "You feel distant, so your solution is to start dating someone else." "It's not dating," she snapped, her voice cracking slightly. "I just need to feel something again. I need to know if there's more out there for me than this." Her hand motioned vaguely around the room, as if our entire life together was some tired, suffocating thing she could discard with a single gesture. I stared at her, the room suddenly feeling too small, too cold. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The words choked in my throat. Finally, I forced them out. "Do you even hear yourself right now?" I asked, my voice quieter but still sharp. "You're standing there, justifying cheating on your husband because you feel distant. What do you think happens next, Jane? You think I'm just going to sit here, smile, and wait for you to decide whether you want to stay in this marriage or not?" "It's not cheating," she said quickly, her voice trembling now. "It's dinner. That's all it is. Don't try to insult my intelligence." I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the floor as I stood up, pacing across the room. "You're not going to tell me this is just about dinner. You don't go to dinner with someone because you're curious. You do it because you've already decided where this is heading." Her silence told me I was right. She bit her lip, looking down at the floor, and for a brief moment, I saw a flash of guilt in her eyes. But then she squared her shoulders, her chin lifting, and the defiance was back. What do you want me to say? She asked, her voice low and trembling with suppressed emotion. That I'm unhappy. That I feel like we've drifted so far apart we don't even know each other anymore. I've tried to talk to you, but you don't hear me. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I need something for myself. I ran a hand through my hair, frustrated and angry but more than anything, feeling a deep, aching hurt beneath it all. I didn't recognize the woman standing in front of me. This was not the Jane I married, the woman who had been my partner for so many years. Somewhere along the line, we had gotten lost, and I hadn't even noticed until now. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. You want something for yourself, I repeated slowly. Fine. But don't pretend like what you're doing is harmless. You don't get to rewrite the rules of our marriage because you're bored or confused. There are consequences, Jane. And this is going to have consequences. She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand, cutting her off. No. I'm done talking about this for now. If you go through with this, if you go out with him tonight, don't expect things to stay the same. I won't sit by and wait while you figure out whether you want me or Jack Robinson. Her eyes flashed again, but this time it wasn't anger. It was fear. For the first time since this conversation began, I saw uncertainty in her, like she hadn't fully considered what this decision could cost her. I'm going out tonight, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to. I nodded once, more to myself than to her. Then we're done here. Without another word, I walked out of the kitchen, grabbed my jacket from the coat rack, and headed out the door. The cool air hit my face as I stepped outside, but it did nothing to dull the simmering anger and confusion boiling inside me. As I walked down the street, my mind raced with the possibilities, the what-ifs spinning out in every direction. I knew one thing for certain, tonight wasn't just a dinner for Jane. It was the beginning of the end, and there was no going back from that. That evening, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting the collar of my shirt. The crisp, white fabric felt stiff against my neck, like I hadn't worn something this formal in ages. My reflection stared back at me, eyes sharp, jaw clenched. It wasn't guilt I saw there, it was resolve. If Jane wanted to test the boundaries of our marriage, I was done playing the role of the passive husband, waiting in the wings while she explored her options. As I ran a hand through my hair, smoothing it down, I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts. There was a name that caught my eye, Lisa. We had worked together for a couple of years, often exchanging light banter during breaks or after work meetings. She was smart, confident, with a sense of humor that always seemed to brighten the room. And I had noticed, more than once, the way her smile lingered a little too long when we talked. I hesitated for a moment, my thumb hovering over her name. Was this the right move? Jane had made her choice, she was out with Jack right now, laughing over dinner, while I was left to stew in the wreckage of our relationship. If she was allowed to find herself, what was stopping me from doing the same? Without overthinking it, I pressed the call button. The phone rang twice before Lisa's familiar voice came through the line, light and curious. Hey, it's been a while. What's up? She asked, a hint of surprise in her tone. We weren't exactly close enough to talk outside of work, which made my call out of the blue stand out. Hey, Lisa, I replied, trying to sound casual. I know this is last minute, but I was wondering if you'd like to grab dinner tonight. I could use the company. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a soft laugh. Well, this is unexpected, she said, her voice teasing but warm. What's the occasion? No occasion, I lied, though the truth was sitting heavily on my chest. Just thought we could hang out outside of work for once. Let me check my busy social calendar, she joked, the sound of her flipping through pages clear in the background. Looks like I'm free tonight after all. Where should we meet? How about that new Italian place downtown? I suggested, already knowing she had mentioned it once in passing. It's supposed to be pretty good. Perfect, she agreed. See you at 7. 7 it is. As I hung up the phone, a strange sense of satisfaction settled over me. I wasn't the kind of man to play games, at least, I hadn't been. But the rules had changed now, and I wasn't going to sit on the sidelines anymore. By the time I arrived at the restaurant, the air had cooled, the sun setting low on the horizon. The patio lights of the Italian bistro cast a soft glow over the cobblestone street, and I could see Lisa waiting by the entrance, dressed in a sleek black dress that made her stand out against the evening crowd. "Wow," she said, smiling as I approached. "You clean up nice." "Thanks," I replied with a grin, feeling a bit more confident. "You look amazing." She smiled and looped her arm through mine as we entered the restaurant. The place had a cozy, intimate atmosphere, with low lighting and candles flickering on each table. As we sat down, I realized that for the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about Jane. The waiter arrived with menus, and after some brief deliberation, we ordered a bottle of red wine to start. Lisa looked across the table at me, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "So," she began, swirling her glass of wine, "are we going to pretend this is just a casual dinner between friends, or are you going to tell me what's really going on?" I blinked, caught off guard by her directness. I hadn't expected her to see through me so quickly, but Lisa was sharp, one of the reasons I had always admired her. I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "I guess I shouldn't be surprised that you're asking." She gave me a knowing look. "Come on, spill it. People don't usually call up colleagues out of the blue for dinner unless something's up." I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much to share, but then the words started to spill out. "It's Jane," I admitted. "Things haven't been great between us for a while now, and tonight, she's out with someone else. A guy. She says it's just dinner, but we both know what that means." Lisa's eyes widened slightly, a flash of understanding crossing her face. "I see," she said softly, taking a sip of her wine. "I'm sorry. That sounds messy." "Yeah," I replied bitterly, running a hand over my face. "Messy's one word for it." For a moment, there was silence between us, the clinking of glasses and quiet conversation from other tables filling the space. But then Lisa leaned forward, her expression softening. "And what about you?" she asked gently. "How are you dealing with it?" I looked up at her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. There was no judgment, no agenda, just genuine concern. It was more than I had gotten from anyone in a long time, and suddenly, the weight of everything I had been holding in came crashing down. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice quieter now. "I thought we were in a rough patch, but I never expected her to cross that line. And now I'm not sure where that leaves us. Or me, for that matter." Lisa reached across the table and placed her hand over mine, a simple gesture of comfort. "For what it's worth," she said softly, "you deserve better than that. I know this is complicated, but you have every right to figure out what you want too. You don't owe her blind loyalty if she's already breaking your trust." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe it was the clarity that came from hearing it out loud, but something shifted inside me in that moment. For too long, I had been stuck, waiting for Jane to decide if she still wanted me. But what about what I wanted? What about my own happiness? "I appreciate that," I said, giving her a small, genuine smile. "Really?" Lisa smiled back, her hand still resting lightly on mine. "Anytime," she said, and for the first time that evening, I felt like I could breathe again. As the night went on, the conversation between Lisa and me flowed easily, the tension from earlier melting away with each laugh and shared story. She had a way of making me forget, if only for a little while, the turmoil waiting for me at home. At one point, as we were finishing dessert, she looked at me thoughtfully and asked, "So what's next for you? I mean, after all this with Jane?" I took a deep breath, staring down at my glass of wine before answering. "Honestly, I don't know yet. But I think I'm done waiting for her to figure out what she wants. It's time I start thinking about what I need. Lisa nodded, her expression serious. Good, she said softly. You deserve that. By the time we left the restaurant, the air had cooled further, and the night felt quieter. As we walked down the street toward Lisa's car, I realized how easy it had been to talk to her, how natural it felt to be with someone who actually cared about what I had to say. When we reached her car, she turned to face me, her smile softer now. Thanks for tonight, she said, leaning in and giving me a light kiss on the cheek. I had a great time. Me too, I replied, a little surprised by how much I meant it. As I watched her drive away, I felt a strange mix of emotions, a sense of satisfaction, but also a quiet, lingering sadness. I knew that tonight was just a temporary reprieve from the chaos that awaited me back home, but it had been a reminder that there was more out there. That maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to be stuck in the wreckage of my marriage forever. The next morning, I woke to the dull ache of a hangover, my head pounding from the wine I had shared with Lisa the night before. The events of the previous evening blurred in my mind, the laughter, the relief of being in someone else's company, the honesty I had laid bare in front of her. But as I rubbed my temples and stared at the ceiling, the weight of reality settled back on my chest like a stone. Jane was still out there, tangled in whatever web of deceit she had spun with Jack, and I had no answers, only questions. I dragged myself out of bed, pulled on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, and headed downstairs to the kitchen. The house was quiet, the kind of eerie silence that follows a storm, and I could feel the tension hanging in the air. I glanced at the clock, it was nearly noon, and Jane hadn't come home yet. It wasn't unusual for her to be gone for long stretches lately, but something about today felt different. Maybe it was the nagging feeling that last night had been a turning point, not just for me, but for her too. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the bitter aroma filling the room as I leaned against the counter, trying to gather my thoughts. What was I supposed to do now? Confront her? Demand answers? Or should I let things play out, see how far she was willing to take this charade before everything collapsed? As if on cue, I heard the front door creak open, followed by the sound of hesitant footsteps. My heart rate quickened. Jane was home. She appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, her hair slightly disheveled, her eyes tired but guarded. She wasn't the Jane I had known for years, the confident, composed woman who always seemed in control. This Jane looked vulnerable, almost unsure of herself, as if she had been lost somewhere along the way and didn't know how to find her way back. "Morning," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced at me briefly before looking down at the floor, as if she couldn't meet my gaze. "Morning," I repeated, my voice sharper than I intended. "It's almost noon, Jane." She flinched at the edge in my tone but didn't respond. Instead, she moved to the coffee maker, pouring herself a cup as if it were any other day. The silence between us was suffocating, each unspoken word hanging in the air like a knife. I couldn't take it anymore. I set my mug down hard on the counter, the sound echoing through the room. "Are we going to talk about this, or are you just going to pretend like nothing's happening?" Jane froze, her hand gripping the coffee pot, her back still turned to me. For a moment, I thought she might ignore me, walk away like she had so many times before. But then she sighed, a long, heavy exhale that seemed to carry the weight of everything we had been avoiding for months. She set the pot down and turned to face me, her eyes finally meeting mine. There was no anger there, no defiance, just exhaustion. "What do you want me to say?" she asked quietly, her voice hollow. "That I'm sorry. That I made a mistake. That I don't know what the hell I'm doing anymore." Her words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered, and for the first time in a long while, I saw the truth in her eyes. She was just as lost as I was, just as confused, and maybe even more afraid. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why, Jane? Why him? Why now?" She stared at me for a long time, her lips trembling slightly as she struggled to find the right words. "I don't know," she whispered, shaking her head. "I don't know why, or when it started. It just happened. And once it did, I didn't know how to stop." I felt a wave of anger rising in my chest, hot and bitter. "You didn't know how to stop?" I echoed, my voice incredulous. "You could have stopped the minute you realized what you were doing. But you didn't. You kept going, and now we're here." Jane flinched again, her eyes filling with unshed tears. "I know I messed up," she admitted, her voice cracking. "But it's not that simple. It hasn't been simple for a long time." I leaned back against the counter, crossing my arms as I tried to rein in my emotions. "What the hell does that mean?" She swallowed hard, looking down at the floor as she spoke. "We've been drifting apart for years," she said quietly. "You know it as well as I do. It's like we've been living in two separate worlds, just going through the motions. And when Jack came along, he made me feel alive again. Like I wasn't invisible." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Invisible. Was that what I had become to her? A background figure in her life, so inconsequential that she didn't even see me anymore. "I never meant to hurt you," she added, her voice barely audible. "But I didn't know how to fix us. I still don't." I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to let all the anger and betrayal boil over, but another part of me, the part that still loved her, despite everything, just felt numb. "I don't know how to fix us either," I said quietly, my voice rough. "But this? What you did? It's not something we can just come back from." Jane wiped a tear from her cheek, her hands trembling as she did. "I know," she whispered. "I know I broke something between us. And I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve it." I took a deep breath, trying to process everything she had said. This was the revelation I had been dreading, the admission that our marriage had been broken long before Jack came into the picture. And maybe, deep down, I had known it too. We had both been coasting, ignoring the cracks in our foundation until it was too late. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice thick with uncertainty. Jane looked at me, her eyes filled with a sadness I hadn't seen in years. "I don't know," she said softly. "But I think we need time. Time to figure out what we want, and if there's anything left to save." The room fell into silence again, both of us standing there, unsure of what to say next. It was clear that whatever came next would be hard, whether we decided to try and salvage what was left of our marriage or let it go entirely. But for the first time in months, there was an honesty between us, fragile but real. And maybe that was a start, even if it was only the beginning of the end. Later that day, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, staring blankly at the TV screen. The revelation had shaken me more than I expected. The truth was out now. Jane's affair wasn't just a moment of weakness, it was a symptom of something much deeper. But knowing that didn't make it hurt any less. The doorbell rang, breaking the quiet. I stood up, still lost in thought, and opened the door to find Lisa standing on the porch, a concerned look on her face. "I wasn't sure if you'd be home," she said softly, her eyes scanning my face for any sign of what I was feeling. "Yeah," I replied, stepping aside to let her in. "It's been a rough morning." We sat down on the couch, the weight of the conversation with Jane still hanging over me. Lisa turned to face me, her expression serious. "Did something happen with Jane?" she asked gently. I nodded, running a hand through my hair. "Yeah." She admitted everything. The affair, the reasons behind it, all of it. Lisa sighed, her brow furrowing with concern. "How are you holding up?" I shrugged, not even sure how to answer that question. "I don't know. Part of me is angry, part of me feels relieved. Like at least now I know the truth. But the other part of me just feels empty." Lisa reached out, placing a comforting hand on my arm. You're allowed to feel all of that. It's a lot to process. Yeah, I said quietly, staring at the floor. I just don't know where to go from here. She didn't say anything for a moment, just sat there with me, her presence a quiet reassurance. And for that, I was grateful. The days following Jane's confession passed in a blur. The house, once filled with the familiar rhythms of our daily lives, now felt cold, like a space neither of us belonged in anymore. We tiptoed around each other, speaking only when necessary, and even then, the conversations were stilted, burdened by the weight of everything unsaid. I had moved into the guest room, more out of necessity than choice. The idea of sharing a bed with Jane after everything that had happened felt unbearable. We both needed space, physically, emotionally, mentally. Yet even with all the distance between us, the atmosphere remained thick with tension, a reminder that things were broken in ways that couldn't easily be repaired. Each night, I would lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying our last conversation over and over in my mind. Her words echoed relentlessly, as if they were carved into my brain. We've been drifting apart for years. Was that really true? Had I been so blind to the slow erosion of our relationship? Or had I been too afraid to admit it? One evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table, a glass of whiskey in front of me, when Jane walked in. She paused at the doorway, her eyes darting toward the glass, and I could see the hesitation in her posture. We hadn't spoken much since that day, but tonight felt different, like something was building between us, something that needed to be addressed. "Do you have a minute?" she asked, her voice soft, tentative. I glanced up at her, taking in the exhaustion etched into her features. She looked as worn out as I felt, as if the weight of the past few days had drained every ounce of energy from her. With a heavy sigh, I gestured for her to sit. "Yeah," I replied, my voice rough from lack of sleep. "What's up?" She sat down across from me, folding her hands on the table. For a moment, she didn't speak, just stared down at her fingers as if they held the answers to the questions she didn't know how to ask. Finally, she looked up, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "About us. About everything." I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. Whatever she had to say, I wasn't sure I was ready to hear it, but I knew we couldn't keep avoiding the inevitable. "I don't know if there's a way to fix this," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I want to believe that we can, but I don't know how. And I don't know if you even want to try." Her words hung in the air, heavy and uncertain. This was the question I had been asking myself since her confession. Could we fix this? And more importantly, did I even want to? "I don't know either," I said, my voice low, barely above a whisper. "Part of me wants to believe we can, but the other part of me. I just don't know how to trust you again, Jane. I don't know if that's something we can get back." She nodded, biting her lip as a tear rolled down her cheek. "I understand," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I know I'm the one who broke us, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I don't want us to end like this, without even trying to figure out if we can find a way back." I sighed, rubbing my face with my hands, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. It was true, we hadn't really talked about what came next, not in any meaningful way. We had been avoiding it, both too afraid to confront the possibility that this might be the end. "I don't want to throw away everything we've built," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. "But things can't go back to the way they were. Not after this." Jane wiped her eyes, nodding as she took a deep breath. "I know," she whispered. "I know things have to change. But I'm willing to try if you are." The silence stretched between us, thick with uncertainty. Could I really do this? Could I push past the hurt, the betrayal, and try to rebuild something from the ashes of what we had once been? Or was it already too late? Before I could answer, the doorbell rang, cutting through the tension like a knife. We both flinched, the unexpected sound jarring us from the intensity of the moment. "I'll get it," I muttered, standing up and heading toward the door. When I opened it, I wasn't prepared for what, or rather, who, was standing on the other side. Lisa. She looked at me with a small, hesitant smile, her eyes searching my face for some sign of how I was feeling. "Hey," she said softly. "I hope I'm not interrupting." I blinked, trying to process her sudden appearance. No. "It's fine," I replied, stepping aside to let her in. "What's up?" She stepped inside, glancing briefly toward the kitchen, where I knew Jane was sitting, listening, waiting. Lisa bit her lip, her brow furrowed as she turned back to me. "I just wanted to check on you," she said, her voice gentle. "After everything. I've been worried about you." I appreciated her concern, more than I could express in that moment, but the timing of her visit felt like another layer of complication added to an already impossible situation. "Thanks," I said, my voice strained. "But now's not a good time." Lisa's eyes flicked toward the kitchen again, understanding dawning on her face. "She's here, isn't she?" I nodded, feeling the tension coil tighter in my chest. "Yeah. We were talking." Her expression softened, and she took a step back toward the door. "I get it. I don't want to make things harder for you. She hesitated, searching for the right words. "I just want you to know that I'm here, if you need me." I managed a small, grateful smile. "I know. Thanks, Lisa." She gave me one last look, her eyes lingering on mine for a moment longer than necessary, before she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, torn between two worlds. When I returned to the kitchen, Jane was staring down at her hands, her face pale, her expression unreadable. She didn't ask who was at the door. She didn't need to. "You've been spending a lot of time with her," Jane said quietly, her voice steady but fragile. "Lisa, I mean." I swallowed, unsure of how to respond. It wasn't like I had been hiding it. Lisa and I had become close over the past few weeks, and while nothing had happened between us beyond friendship, I couldn't deny the connection we had. But this wasn't about Lisa. Not really. "She's a friend," I said simply, though the weight of the truth between us made the word feel insufficient. Jane nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I guess I can't really say anything, can I?" she murmured, her voice laced with sadness. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. She had been the one to betray me first, yet now, we were both standing on shaky ground, unsure of where we stood with each other, or with anyone else. "Jane," I said softly, "this isn't about her. It's about us. And whether or not we can find a way through this mess." She looked up at me then, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Do you want to?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Do you want to try and fix us? Or have you already moved on?" Her question hit me like a punch to the gut, because the truth was, I didn't know the answer. Part of me was still tethered to the life we had built together, the years of shared memories and moments that had shaped who we were. But another part of me, a part that had grown louder in recent weeks, was beginning to see a different future. One where I wasn't tied to the past anymore. One where I could start fresh. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice cracking under the weight of the truth. "I don't know what I want anymore." And there it was, the admission that had been lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be said out loud. The aftermath of Jane's betrayal wasn't just about what she had done. It was about what it had revealed, that we had both been drifting for a long time, and now, we were standing at a crossroads with no clear path ahead. Jane's face crumpled, and she wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I wish I could take it all back," she whispered. "I wish I hadn't done what I did." "I know," I said softly. "But we can't go back. We can only figure out where to go from here." And for the first time in a long while, the reality of that truth settled between us. There were no easy answers. No quick fixes. Only the aftermath of what had been broken, and the uncertain future that lay ahead.